to go ahead and start the recording. And I think we're good to begin. If nobody needs any more time. All good? All good it is. The yellow sign. Let the red dawn surmise what we shall do when this blue starlight dies and all is through. There are so many things which are impossible to explain. Why should certain chords in music make me think of the brown and golden tints of autumn foliage? Why should the Mass of Saint Cecile bend my thoughts, wandering among caverns whose walls blazed with ragged masses of virgin silver? What was it in the roar and turmoil of Broadway at 6 o'clock that flashed before my eyes the picture of a still Breton forest, where sunlight filtered through spring foliage, and Sylvia bent, half curiously, half tenderly, over a small green lizard, murmuring, "To think that this is also a little ward of God." When I first saw the watchman, his back was towards me. I looked at him indifferently until he went into the church. I paid no more attention to him than I had to any other man who lounged through Washington Square that morning. And when I shut my window and turned back into my studio, I had forgotten him. Late in the afternoon, the day being warm, I raised the window again and leaned out to get a sniff of air. A man was standing in the courtyard of the church, and I noticed him again with as little interest as I had that morning. I looked across the square to where the fountain was playing, and then, with my mind filled with vague impressions of trees, asphalt drives, and the moving groups of nursemaids and the holiday makers, I started to walk back to my easel. As I turned, my listless glance included the man below in the churchyard. His face was toward me now, and with a perfectly involuntary movement I bent to see it. At the same moment he raised his head and looked at me. Instantly I thought of a coffin worm. Whatever it was about the man that repelled me I did not know, but the impression of a plump, white grave worm was so intense and nauseating that I must have shown it in my expression, for he turned his puffy face away with a movement which made me think of a disturbed grub in a chestnut. I went back to my easel and motioned the model to resume her pose. After working a while, I was satisfied that I was spoiling what I had done as rapidly as possible, and I took up a palette knife and scraped the color out again. The flesh tones were shallow and unhealthy, and I did not understand how I could have painted such sickly color into a study which before that had glowed with healthy tones. I looked at Tessie. She had not changed, and the clear flush of health dyed her neck and cheeks as I frowned. "Is it something I have done?" she said. "No. I've made a mess of this arm, and for the life of me I can't see how I came to paint such mud into that canvas," I replied. "Don't I pose well?" she insisted. "Of course, perfectly." "Then it's not my fault?" "No, it's my own." "I'm very sorry," she said. I told her she could rest while I applied rag and turpentine to the plague spot on my canvas, and she went off to smoke a cigarette and look over the illustrations in the Courrier François. I did not know whether it was something in the turpentine or a defect in the canvas, but the more I scrubbed, the more that gangrene seemed to spread. I worked like a beaver to get it out, and yet the disease appeared to creep from limb to limb of the study before me. Alarmed, I strove to arrest it, but now the color on the breast changed, and the whole figure seemed to absorb the infection as a sponge soaks up water. Vigorously I applied palette knife, turpentine, and scraper, thinking all the time what a seance I should hold with Duval, who had sold me the canvas. But soon as I noticed that it was not the canvas which was defective, nor yet the colors of Edward. It must be the turpentine, I thought angrily, or else my eyes have become so blurred and confused by the afternoon light that I can't see straight. I called Tessie, the model. She came and leaned over my chair, blowing rings of smoke into the air. "What have you been doing to it?" she exclaimed. "Nothing," I growled. "It must be this turpentine." "What a horrible color it is now," she continued. "Do you think my flesh resembles green cheese?" "No, I don't," I said angrily. "Did you ever know me to paint like that before?" "No, indeed." "Well, then, it must be the turpentine or something," she admitted. She slipped on a Japanese robe and walked to the window. I scraped and rubbed until I was tired, and finally picked up my brushes and hurled them through the canvas with forcible expression, the tone alone of which reached Tessie's ears. Nevertheless, she promptly began. "That's it! Swear and act silly and ruin your brushes. You've been 3 weeks on that study, and now look! What's the good of ripping the canvas? What creature artists are!" I felt about as much ashamed as I usually did after such an outbreak, and I turned the ruined canvas to the wall. Tessie helped me clean my brushes and then danced away to dress. From the screen she regaled me with bits of advice concerning whole or partial loss of temper until, thinking perhaps I had been tormented sufficiently, she came out to implore me to button her waist where she could not reach it on the shoulder. Everything went wrong from the time you came back from the window and talked about that horrid-looking man you saw in the churchyard, she announced. Yes, he probably bewitched my picture, I said, yawning. I looked at my watch. It's after 6, I know, said Tessie, adjusting her hat before the mirror. Yes, I replied. I didn't mean to keep you so long. I leaned out the window, but recoiled with disgust, for the young man with the pasty face stood below in the churchyard. Tessie saw my gesture of disapproval and leaned from the window. Is that the man you don't like? She whispered. I nodded. I can't see his face, but he does look fat and soft, some way or other, she continued, turning to look at me. He reminds me of a dream, an awful dream I once had. Or, she mused, looking down at her shapely shoes, was it a dream after all? How should I know? I smiled. Tessie smiled in reply. You were in it, she said, so perhaps you might know something about it. Tessie! Tessie! I protested. Don't you dare flatter by saying that you dream about me. But I did, she insisted. Shall I tell you about it? Go ahead, I replied, lighting a cigarette. Tessie leaned back on the open windowsill and began very seriously. One night last winter I was lying in bed, thinking about nothing at all in particular. I had been posing for you, and I was tired out, yet it seemed impossible for me to sleep. I heard the bells in the city ring 10, 11, and then midnight. I must have fallen asleep about midnight, because I don't remember hearing the bells after that. It seemed to me that I had scarcely closed my eyes when I dreamed that something impelled me to go to the window. I rose, and raising the sash, leaned out. 25th Street was deserted as far as I could see. I began to be afraid. Everything outside seemed so black and uncomfortable. Excuse me. Then the sound of wheels in the distance came to my ears, and it seemed to me as though that was what I must wait for. Very slowly the wheels approached, and frankly I could make out a vehicle moving along the street. Finally I could make out a vehicle moving along the street. It came nearer and nearer, and when it passed beneath my window I saw it was a hearse. Then, as I trembled with fear, the driver turned and looked straight at me. When I awoke, I was standing by the open window shivering with cold, but the black-plumed hearse and the driver were gone. I dreamed this dream again in March last, and again awoke beside the open window. Last night the dream came again. You remember how it was raining. When I awoke, standing at the open window, my nightdress was soaked. But where did I come into the dream? I asked. You were in the coffin. But you were not dead. In the coffin? Yes. How did you know? Could you see me? No, I only knew you were there. Had you been eating Welsh rarebits or lobster salad? I began, laughing, but the girl interrupted me with a frightened cry. Hello? What's up? I said as she shrank into the embrasure by the window. The man below in the churchyard. He drove the hearse. Nonsense, I said, but Tessie's eyes were wide with terror. I went to the window and looked out. The man was gone. Come, Tessie, I urged. Don't be foolish. You've posed too long. You're nervous. Do you think I could forget that face? She murmured. 3 times I saw the hearse pass below my window, and every time the driver turned and looked up at me. Oh, his face was so white and soft. It looked dead. It looked as if it had been dead a long time. I'm gonna check a message real quick. Is it important? Oh, 4 messages in... Is it live? Oh, okay. Thank you, Cred, for helping out Austin. I induced the girl to sit down and swallow a glass of Marsala. Then I sat down beside her and tried to give her some advice. Look here, Tessie, I said. You go to the country for a week or 2, and you'll have no more dreams about hearses. You pose all day, and when the night comes, your nerves are upset. You can't keep this up. Then again, instead of going to bed when your day's work is done, you run off to picnics at Sulzer's Park, or go to the El Dorado or Coney Island, and when you come down here next morning, you are fagged out. There was no real hearse. There was a soft-shell crab dream. Hello. She smiled faintly. What about the man in the churchyard? Oh, he's only an ordinary, unhealthy, everyday creature. As true as my name is Tessie Reardon, I swear to you, Mr. Scott, that the face of the man below in the churchyard is the face of the man who drove the hearse. What of it? I said. It's an honest trade. Then you think I did see the hearse? Oh, I said diplomatically. If you really did, it might not be unlikely that the man below drove it. There's nothing in that. Tessie rose, unrolled her scented handkerchief, and taking a bit of gum from a knot in the hem, placed it in her mouth. Then, drawing on her gloves, she offered me her hand with a frank, "Good night, Mr. Scott," and walked out. End of chapter 1. Okay. Pretty standard so far, you know. The hearse drivers in your nightmares are real and staring at you. That's classic. It happens to me anyway. Let's go ahead and push on. I got it in me. I don't need to take a break. We've been at this for 20 minutes only. 10 minutes since we started recording. Let's keep going. I believe in you. Look, I am entitled to take a break at whatever chapter break I want. I'm choosing not to. And you should be grateful. The next morning, Thomas the bellboy brought me the Herald and a bit of news. The church next door had been sold. I thanked heaven for it, not that being a Catholic I had any repugnance for the congregation next door, but because my nerves were shattered by a blatant exhorter, whose every word echoed through the aisle of the church as if it had been my own rooms, and who insisted on his R's with a nasal persistence which revolted my every instinct. Come on, Nick. Come on. You're poisoning my chat. Then, too, there was a fiend in human shape, an organist, who reeled off some of the grand old hymns with an interpretation of his own, and I longed for the blood of a creature who could play the doxology with an amendment of minor chords which one hears only in a quartet of very young undergraduates. I believe the minister was a good man, but even when he bellowed, "And the Lord said unto Moses, The Lord is a man of war, the Lord is his name. My wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword," I wondered how many centuries of purgatory it would take to atone for such a sin as speaking like that. "Who bought the property?" I asked Thomas. "Nobody that I know, sir. They do say the gent what owns this here Hamilton Flats was looking at it. He might be building more studios." I looked to the window. The young man with the unhealthy face stood by the churchyard gate, and at the mere sight of him the same overwhelming repugnance took possession of me. "By the way, Thomas," I said, "who is that fellow down there?" Thomas sniffed. "That there worm, sir? He's night watchman of the church, sir. He makes me tired of sitting out all night on them steps and looking at you, insultin' like. I'd have punched his head, sir, I beg pardon, sir." "Go on, Thomas." "One night a-comin' home with Harry, the other English boy, I sees I'm sittin' there on them steps. We had Molly and Jen with us, sir, the two girls at the tray service, and he looks so insultin' at us that I up and says, 'What you looking at, you fat slug?' Beg pardon, sir, that's how I says, sir. Then he don't say nothin', and I says, 'Come out and I'll punch that puddlin' head.' Then I opens the gate and goes in, but he don't say nothin' and only looks insultin' like. Then I says, then I hits him one, but his head was that cold and mushy, and it'd sicken you to touch him." "What did he do then?" I asked curiously. "Him? Nothin'." "And you, Thomas?" The young fellow flushed with embarrassment and smiled uneasily. "Mr. Scott, sir, I ain't no coward, sir, and I ain't make it all the way. I can't make out at all why I run. I was in the 5th Lancers, sir, Bulger at Tel El Kebir, and I was shot by the Wells." "You don't mean to say you ran away?" "Yes, sir, I run." "Why?" "That's just what I want to know, sir. I grabbed Molly and run, and the rest was as frightened as I." "But what were they frightened at?" Thomas refused to answer for a while, but now my curiosity was aroused about the repulsive young man below, and I pressed him. 3 years' sojourn in America had only modified Thomas' Cockney dialect, but had given him the American's fear of ridicule. "You won't believe me, Mr. Scott, sir." "Yes, I will." "You will laugh at me, sir." "Nonsense." He hesitated. Well, sir, it's God's truth that when I hit him, he grabbed me wrist, sir, and when I twisted his soft, mushy fist, one of his fingers come off in me hand. The utter loathing and horror of Thomas's face must have been reflected in my own, for he added, "It's awful, and now when I see him I just go away. He makes me ill." When Thomas had gone, I went to the window. The man stood beside the church railing with both hands on the gate, but I hastily retreated to my easel again, sickened and horrified, for I saw that the middle finger of his right hand was missing. At 9 o'clock, Tessie appeared and vanished behind the screen with a merry "Good morning, Mr. Scott." When she had reappeared and taken her pose upon the model stand, I started a new canvas, much to her delight. She remained silent as long as I was on the drawing, but as soon as the scrape of the charcoal ceased and I took up my fixative, she began to chatter. "Oh, I had such a lovely time last night. We went to Tony Pastor's." "Who are we?" I demanded. "Oh, Maggie, you know, Mr. White's model, and Pinky McCormick. We call her Pinky because she's got that beautiful red hair you artists like so much. And Lizzie Burke." I sent a shower of spray from the fixative over the canvas and said, "Well, go on." "We saw Kelly and Baby Barnes the skirt dancer and all the rest." I made a mash. "Then you have gone back on me, Tessie?" She laughed and shook her head. "He's Lizzie Burke's brother Ed. He's a perfect gentleman." I felt constrained to give her some parental advice concerning mashing, which she took with a bright smile. "Oh, I can take care of a strange mash," she said, examining her chewing gum. "But Ed is different. Lizzie is my best friend." And she related how Ed had come back from the stocking mill in Lowell, Massachusetts, to find her and Lizzie grown up, and what an accomplished young man he was, and how he thought nothing of squandering $50 for ice cream and oysters to celebrate his entry as a clerk into the woolen department of Macy's. Before she finished, I began to paint, and she resumed the pose, smiling and chattering like a sparrow. By noon, I had the study fairly well rubbed in, and Tessie came to look at it. "That's better," she said. I thought so too, and ate my lunch with a satisfied feeling that all was going well. Tessie spread her lunch on a drawing table opposite me, and we drank our claret from the same bottle and lighted our cigarettes from the same match. I was very much attached to Tessie. I had watched her shoot up into a slender but exquisitely formed woman from a frail, awkward child. She had posed for me during the last 3 years, and among all my models she was my favorite. It would have troubled me very much indeed if had she become tough or fly, as the phrase goes, but I never noticed any deterioration of her manner, and felt at heart that she was all right. She and I never discussed morals at all, and I had no intention of doing so, partly because I had known myself, and partly because I knew she would do what she liked in spite of me. Still, I did hope she would steer clear of complications, because I wished her well, and then I also had a selfish desire to retain the best model I had. Fly as fuck. I know, she's fly, dude. I knew that mashing, as she termed it, had no significance with girls like Tessie, and that such things in America did not resemble in the least the same things in Paris. Yet, having lived with my eyes open, I also knew that somebody would take Tessie away some day, in one manner or another, and though I professed to myself that marriage was nonsense, I sincerely hoped that in this case there would be a priest at the end of the vista. I am a Catholic. Oh, this is the story that The Fly is based on. No, this is the story that Jim Carrey's The Mask is based on, remember? I am a Catholic. When I listen to High Mass, when I sign myself, I feel that everything, including myself, is more cheerful, and when I confess, it does me good. A man who lives as much alone as I do must confess to somebody. Then again, Sylvia was Catholic, and it was reason enough for me. But I was speaking of Tessie, which is very different. Tessie was also Catholic, and much more devout than I, so taking it all in all, I had little fear for my pretty model until she should fall in love. But then I knew that fate alone would decide her future for her, and I prayed inwardly that fate would keep her away from men like me, and throw her into the path nothing but Ed Burke's and Jimmy McCormick's. Bless her sweet face. Tessie sat, blowing rings of smoke into the ceiling and tinkling the ice in her tumbler. "Do you know that I also had a dream last night?" I observed. "Not about that man," she laughed. "Exactly. A dream similar to yours, only much worse." It was foolish and thoughtless of me to say this, but you know how little tact the average painter has. "I must have fallen asleep about 10 o'clock," I continued. After a while I dreamt that I awoke. So plainly did I hear the midnight bells, the wind in the tree branches, and the whistle of streamers from the bay, that even now I can scarcely believe I was not awake. I seemed to be lying in a box which had a glass cover. Dimly I saw the street lamps as I passed, for I must tell you, Tessie, the box in which I reclined appeared to lie in a cushioned wagon which jolted me over a stony pavement. After a while I became impatient and tried to move, but the box was too narrow. My hands were crossed on my breast, and so I could not raise them to help myself. I listened and then tried to call, but my voice was gone. I could hear the trample of the horses attached to the wagon and even the breathing of the driver. Then another sound broke upon my ears, like the raising of a window sash. I managed to turn my head a little, and I found I could look not only through the glass cover of my box, but also through the glass panes in the side of the covered vehicle. I saw houses, empty and silent, with neither light nor life about any of them excepting one. In that house a window was open on the first floor, and a figure all in white stood looking down at the street. It was you. Tessie had turned her face away from me and leaned on the table with her elbow. I could see your face, I resumed, and it seemed to me to be very sorrowful. Then we passed on and turned into a narrow black lane. Presently the horses stopped. I waited and waited, closing my eyes with fear and impatience, but all was silent as the grave. After what seemed to me hours, I began to feel uncomfortable. A sense that somebody was close to me made me unclose my eyes. Then I saw the white face of the hearse driver looking at me through the coffin lid. A sob from Tessie interrupted me. She was trembling like a leaf. I saw I had made an ass of myself, and I attempted to repair the damage. "Why, Tess," I said, "I only told you this to show you what influence your story might have on another person's dreams. You don't suppose I really lay in a coffin, do you?" Maybe this is Jim Carrey's The Mask. I know, right? "What are you trembling for? Don't you see that your dream and my unreasonable dislike for that inoffensive watchman of the church simply set my brain working as soon as I fell asleep?" She laid her head between her arms and sobbed as if her heart would break. What a precious triple donkey I had made of myself! But I was about to break my record. I went over and put my arm about her. "Tessie, dear, forgive me," I said. "I had no business to frighten you with such nonsense. You are too sensible a girl, too good a Catholic to believe in dreams." Her hand tightened on mine, and her head fell back upon my shoulder, but she still trembled, and I petted her and comforted her. "Come, Tess, open your eyes and smile." Her eyes opened with a slow, languid movement and met mine, but their expression was so queer that I hastened to reassure her again. "It's all humbug, Tessie. You surely are not afraid that any harm will come to you because of that?" "No," she said, but her scarlet lips quivered. "What's the matter? Are you afraid?" "Yes, not for myself." "For me, then?" I demanded gaily. "For you," she murmured in a voice almost inaudible. I care for you." At first I started to laugh, but when I understood her, a shock passed through me, and I sat like one turned to stone. This was the crowning bit of idiocy I had committed. During the moment which elapsed between her reply and my answer, I thought of 1,000 responses to that innocent confession. I could pass it by with a laugh, I could misunderstand her and assure her as to my health, I could simply point out that it was impossible she could love me. But my reply was quicker than my thoughts, and I might think and think now when it's too late, for I had kissed her on the mouth. Jim Carrey's The Bug. That's a big. He should do that. It should be It shouldn't be Jeff Goldblum. It should be Jim Carrey turning into the Bug. That evening, I took my usual walk in Washington Park, pondering over the occurrences of the day. I was thoroughly committed. There was no back out now, and I stared the future right in the face. I was not good, not even scrupulous, but I had no idea of deceiving either myself or Tessie. The one passion of my life lay buried in the sunlit forests of Brittany. Was it buried forever? Hope cried no. For 3 years I had been listening to the voice of hope, and for 3 years I had waited for a footstep on my threshold. Had Sylvia forgotten? No, cried Hope. I said that I was no good. That is true, but still I was not exactly a comic opera villain. I had led an easy-going and reckless life, taking what invited me of pleasure, deploring and sometimes bitterly regretting consequences. In one thing alone except my painting was I serious, and that was something which lay hidden, if not lost, in the Breton forests. It was too late for me to regret what had occurred during the day. Whatever it had been, a pity, a sudden tenderness for sorrow, or the more brutal instinct of gratified vanity, it was all the same now, and unless I wished to bruise an innocent heart, my path lay marked before me. The fire and strength, the depth of passion of a love which I had never even suspected, with all my imagined experience in the world, left me no alternative but to respond or send her away. Whether because I am so cowardly about giving pain to others, or whether it was that I have little of the gloomy Puritan in me, I do not know, but I shrank from disclaiming responsibility for that thoughtless kiss, and in fact had no time to do so before the gates of her heart opened and the flood poured forth. Others who habitually do their duty and find a sullen satisfaction in making themselves and everybody else unhappy, they might have withstood it. But I did not. I dared not. After the storm had abated, I did tell her that she might better have loved Ed Burke and worn a plain gold ring, but she would not hear of it, and I thought perhaps as long as she had decided to love somebody she could not marry, it had better be me. I, at least, could treat her with an intelligent affection, and whenever she became tired of her infatuation, she could go, none the worse for it. For I was decided on that point, although I knew how hard it would be. I remembered the usual termination of platonic liaisons, and thought how disgusted I had been whenever I heard of one. I knew I was undertaking a great deal for so unscrupulous a man as I was, and I dreamed of the future, but never for one moment did I doubt that she was safe with me. Had it been anybody but Tessie, I should not have bothered my head about scruples, for it did not occur to me to sacrifice Tessie, as I would have sacrificed a woman of the world. I looked the future squarely in the face and saw the several probable endings to the affair. She would either tire of the whole thing, or become so unhappy that I would have either to marry her or go away. If I married her, she would be unhappy. I with a wife unsuited to me, and she with a husband unsuitable for any woman. For my past life could scarcely entitle me to marry. If I went away, she might either fall ill, recover, and marry some Eddie Burke, or she might recklessly and deliberately go and do something foolish. On the other hand, if she tired of me, then her whole life would be before her with the beautiful vistas of Eddie Burkes and marriage rings and twins and Harlem Flats and heaven knows what. As I strolled along through the trees by the Washington Arch, I decided that she should find a substantial friend in me, anyway, and the future could take care of itself. Then I went into the house and put on my evening dress, for the little faintly perfumed note on my dresser said, "Have a cab at the stage door at 11," and the note was signed, "Edith Carmichael, Metropolitan Theater." Self-sabotage, you think so? Probably. I took supper that night, or rather we took supper, Miss Carmichael and I, at Solari's, and the dawn was just beginning to gild the cross on the Memorial Church as I entered Washington Square after leaving Edith at the Brunswick. There was not a soul in the park as I passed along the trees and took the walk which leads from the Garibaldi statue to Hamilton Apartment House, but as I passed the churchyard I saw a figure sitting on the stone steps. In spite of myself, I saw a figure sitting on the... Well, I repeated the line. In spite of myself, a chill crept over me at the sight of the white puffy face, and I hastened to pass. Then he said something which might have been addressed to me, or might merely have been a mutter to himself. But a sudden furious anger flamed up within me that such a creature should address me. For an instant I felt like wheeling about and smashing my stick over his head. But I walked on, and entering the Hamilton, went to my apartment. For some time I tossed about the bed, trying to get the sound of his voice out of my ears, but I could not. It filled my head, that muttering sound, like thick, oily smoke from a fat rendering vat, or an odor of noisome decay. And as I lay and tossed about, the voice in my ear seemed more distinct, and I began to understand the words he had muttered. They came to me slowly, as if I had forgotten them, and at last I could make some sense out of the sounds. It was this: "Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign?" I was furious. What did he mean by that? Then with a curse upon him and his, I rolled over and went to sleep. But when I awoke later I looked pale and haggard, for I had dreamed the dream of the night before, and it troubled me more than I cared to think. I dressed and went down to my studio. Tessie sat by the window, but as I came in she rose and put both arms around my neck for an innocent kiss. She looked so sweet and dainty that I kissed her again, and then sat down before the easel. "Hello, where's the study I began yesterday?" I asked. Tessie looked conscious, but did not answer. I began to hunt among the piles of canvases, saying, "Hurry up, Tess, and get ready. We must take advantage of the morning light." When at last I gave up the search among the other canvases and turned to look around the room for the missing study, I noticed Tessie standing by the screen with her clothes still on. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Don't you feel well?" "Yes." "Well, then hurry." Do you want me to pose as I have always posed?" Then I understood. Here was a new complication. I had lost, of course, the best nude model I had ever seen. I looked at Tessie. Her face was scarlet. Alas, alas! We have eaten the tree of knowledge, and Eden and native innocence were dreams of the past. I mean, for her. I suppose she noticed the disappointment on my face, for she said, "I will pose if you wish. The study is behind the screen where I put it." "No," I said, "we will begin something new." And I went to my wardrobe and picked out a Moorish costume which fairly blazed with tinsel. It was a genuine costume, and Tessie retired to the screen with it enchanted. She came When she came forth again, I was astonished. Her long black hair was bound above her forehead with a circlet of turquoises, and the ends curled about in a glittering girdle. Her feet were encased in the embroidered pointed slippers, and the skirt of her costume, curiously wrought with arabesques in silver, fell to her ankles. The deep metallic blue vest embroidered with silver, and the short Mauresque jacket spangled and sewn up with turquoises became her wonderfully. She came up to me and held up her face, smiling. I slipped my hand into my pocket and, drawing out a gold chain with a cross attached, dropped it over her head. "It's yours, Tessie." "Mine," she faltered. "Yours. Now go and pose." Then, with a radiant smile, she ran behind the screen and presently reappeared with a little box on which was written my name. "I had intended to give it to you when I went home tonight," she said, "but I can't wait now." I opened the box. On the pink cotton inside lay a clasp of black onyx, on which was inlaid a curious symbol, or letter in gold. It was neither Arabic, nor Chinese, nor, as I found afterwards, did it belong to any human script. "It's all I had to give you for a keepsake," she said timidly. I was annoyed, but I told her how much I should prize it and promised to wear it always. She fastened it on my coat beneath the lapel. "How foolish, Tess, to go and buy me such a beautiful thing as this." "I did not buy it," she laughed. "Where did you get it?" Then she told me how she had found it one day while coming from the aquarium in the Battery, how she had advertised it and watched the papers, but at last gave up all hopes of finding the owner. "That was last winter," she said, "the very day I had the first horrid dream about the hearse." I remembered my dream of the previous night, but I said nothing, and presently my charcoal was flying over a new canvas, and Tessie stood motionless on the model stand. End of chapter 2. Ruh-roh. That doesn't sound good to me. But it doesn't seem like Mr. Scott has yet made the connection. Maybe he didn't say anything. Shaz Botsticks? That's a new one. Alright, we're going to power through the next chapter. I think there's maybe 2 more. BRB, I need thing. Okay, we can wait. That's fine. What do you guys think so far? Some people like this. Some people prefer this to the Repair of Reputations. I don't, but I think it's quite good too. It's it's got a very strong romantic bent to it. Robert W. Chambers famously, when he was not a horror writer, was a romance writer. And I've read some of his other work, and he's very skilled in that. I like this one more actually. Yeah, I totally understand that. It's he's really flexing his muscles in how at home he feels in the romance literature. He's excellent at that. He's very skilled in, all the right types of imagery, and he's really having a good time with it. Which is weird because I don't like this narrator. I like Mr. Scott a little bit. I don't know. I like that he just sucks, and he's just open about the fact that he sucks. I think that's pretty cool. With the romance, yeah, it's intentionally like meant to be a complicated, not super ideal situation. Like you can tell, it's like he's very conflicted about it. He doesn't really like. I liked the way that he talked about it in his monologue, where he was like the way he rationalizes it is very interesting to me. He's like, I'm not a good person, but if she loves me, I don't want to break her heart, so I'm gonna sort of, you know, I will be with her until eventually she sort of gets over this crush she has on me and moves on, and you know, we'll go our separate ways happily. I thought that was an interesting way to look at it. he is self-aware enough to try and downplay the relationship. Yeah, definitely. Like he's sort of comforting himself, but he's very self-aware. Yeah. Um, and he talks about Sylvia a couple times, but he doesn't go into very much detail about who or what Sylvia is. I sort of have gained the impression that he's maybe a widower, and that Sylvia is what he said. He said that thing about um, he only has two passions in life. One is painting, and the other is currently buried in Breton Forest. So I think maybe that's where Sylvia is, and Sylvia is his wife. But I don't think it's ever explicitly stated. That's just the implication that I understood from it. So he's probably a fair bit older than Tessie, and he seems genuinely uncomfortable with that fact, which is interesting. That goes into his self-awareness. Hello. All right, let's keep going. Chapter 3. The day following was a disastrous one for me. While moving a framed canvas from one easel to another, my foot slipped on the polished floor, and I fell heavily on both wrists. They were so badly sprained that it was useless to attempt to hold a brush, and I was obligated to wander about the studio, glaring at unfinished drawings and sketches until despair seized me, and I sat down to smoke and twiddle my thumbs with rage. The rain blew against my windows and rattled on the roof of the church, driving me into a nervous fit with its interminable patter. Tessie sat sewing by the window, and every now and then raised her head and looked at me with such innocent compassion that I began to feel ashamed of my irritation, and I looked about for something to occupy me. I had read all the papers and all the books in the library, but for the sake of something to do I went to the bookcases and shoved them open with my elbow. I knew every volume by its color and examined them all, passing slowly around the library and whistling to keep up my spirits. I was turning to go into the dining room when my eye fell upon a book bound in serpent skin, standing in a corner of the top shelf of the last bookcase. I did not remember it, and from the floor could not decipher the pale lettering on the back, so I went to the smoking room and called Tessie. She came from the studio and climbed up to reach the book. "What is it?" I asked. "The King in Yellow." I was dumbfounded. Who had placed it there? How came it to my rooms? I had long ago decided that I should never open that book, and nothing on earth could have persuaded me to buy it. Fearful lest curiosity might tempt me to open it, I had never even looked at it in bookstores. If I ever had had any curiosity to read it, the awful tragedy of young Castaigne, whom I knew, prevented me from exploring its wicked pages. That's interesting. I had always refused to listen to any description of it, and indeed nobody ever ventured to discuss the second part aloud, so I had absolutely no knowledge of what those leaves might reveal. I stared at the poisonous mottled binding as I would at a snake. "Don't touch it, Tessie," I said. "Come down." Of course my admonition was enough to arouse her curiosity, and before I could prevent it she took the book and, laughing, danced off into the studio with it. I called to her, but she slipped away with a tormenting smile at my helpless hands, and I followed her with some impatience. "Tessie," I cried, entering the library, "listen, I'm serious. Put that book away. I do not wish you to open it." The library was empty. I went into both drawing rooms, then into the bedrooms, laundry, kitchen, and finally returned to the library and began a systematic search. She had hidden herself so well that it was half an hour later when I discovered her crouching, white and silent, by the latticed window in the storeroom above. At first glance I knew she had been punished for her foolishness. The King in Yellow lay at her feet, but the book was open at the second part. I looked at Tessie and saw it was too late. She had opened The King in Yellow. Then I took her by the hand and led her into the studio. She seemed dazed, and when I told her to lie down on the sofa, she obeyed me without a word. After a while she closed her eyes and her breathing became regular and deep, but I could not determine whether or not she slept. For a long while I sat silently beside her, but she neither stirred nor spoke, and at last I rose, and entering the unused storeroom, took the book in my least injured hand. It seemed heavy as lead, but I carried it into the studio again, and sitting down on the rug beside the sofa, I opened it and read it through from beginning to end. When, faint with excess of my emotions, I dropped the volume and leaned wearily back on the sofa, Tessie opened her eyes and looked at me. We had been speaking for some time in a dull, monotonous strain before I realized that we were discussing the King in Yellow. Oh, the sin of writing such words. Words which are clear as crystal, limpid and musical as bubbling springs, words which sparkle and glow like the poisoned diamonds of the Medicis. Oh, the wickedness, the hopeless damnation of a soul who could fascinate and paralyze human creatures with such words. Words understood by the ignorant and wise alike. Words which are more precious than jewels, more soothing than music, and more awful than death. We talked on, unmindful of the gathering shadows, and she was begging me to throw away the clasp of black onyx quaintly inlaid with what we now knew to be the yellow sign. I never shall know why I refused, though even at this hour here in my bedroom as I write this confession, I should be glad to know what it was that prevented me from tearing the yellow sign from my breast and casting it into the fire. I am sure I wished to do so, and yet Tessie pleaded with me in vain. Night fell and the hours dragged on, but still we murmured to each other of the king and of the pallid mask. And midnight sounded from the misty spires in the fog-wrapped city. We spoke of Hastur and of Casilda, while outside the fog rolled against the blank window panes, as the cloud waves roll and break on the shores of Hali. The house was very silent now, and not a sound came up from the misty streets. Tessie lay among the cushions, her face a grey blot in the gloom, but her hands were clasped in mine, and I knew that she knew and read my thoughts as I read hers, for we had understood the mystery of the Hyades, and the phantom of truth was laid. For we had understood the mystery of the Hyades, and the phantom of truth was laid. Then, as we answered each other swiftly, silently, thought on thought, the shadows stirred in the gloom about us, and far in the distant streets we heard a sound. So much this guy is doing against his own will. Okay, so I have an interpretation of this, um, which I don't remember if it ends up being confirmed or if I just thought of it, but what I thought when I first read that was that he saw that Tessie had read the book and like was fucked up and suffering from it, and he knew that it was a terrible book, but he decided, I don't want her to go through it alone, and he chose to read the book and to make himself suffer with her and talk about it with her to try and, comfort her and not have her suffer by herself. But it does kind of read like he was compelled to by another force. I'm not sure, but that was my interpretation of it. And then obviously his refusal to cast away the yellow sign is more of a compulsion against his will. Nearer and nearer the sound came, the dull crunching of wheels, nearer, and yet nearer, and now outside before the door it ceased. Then I dragged myself to the window and saw a black-plumed hearse. It was open, so even glancing at it will be addictive. That's also part of it, possibly, yeah, because Castaigne mentions a similar thing where he throws it, but it accidentally opens up and just becomes he becomes compelled to read it from glancing at it. That's actually that's a definite possibility I hadn't even thought of. The gate below opened and shut, and I crept, shaking to my door, and bolted it, but I knew no bolts, no locks could keep that creature out who was coming for the yellow sign. And now I heard him moving very swiftly along the hall. Now he was at the door, and the bolts rotted at his touch. Now he had entered. With eyes startling from my head, I peered into the darkness, but when he came into my room I did not see him. It was only when I felt him envelop me in his cold, soft grasp that I cried out and struggled with deadly fury, but my hands were useless, and he tore the onyx clasp from my coat, and it struck me full in the face. Then as I fell, I heard Tessie's soft cry, and her spirit fled, and even while falling I longed to follow her, for I knew that the king in yellow had opened his tattered mantle, and there was only God to cry to now. That was fast. I could tell more, but I cannot see what help it would be to the world. As for me, I am past human help or hope. As I lie here, writing careless even whether or not I die before I finish, I can see the doctor gathering up his powders and phials with a vague gesture to the good priest beside me, which I understand. They will be very curious to know the tragedy, they of the outside world who write books and print millions of newspapers, but I shall write no more, and the Father Confessor will seal my last words with the seal of sanctity when his holy office is done. They of the outside world may send their creatures into wrecked homes and death-smitten firesides, and their newspapers will batten on blood and tears, but with me their spies must halt before the confessional. They know that Tessie is dead and that I am dying. They know how the people in the house, aroused by an infernal scream, rushed into my room and found one living and two dead. But they do not know what I shall tell them now. They do not know that the doctor said as he pointed to a horrible decomposed heap on the floor, the livid corpse of the watchman from the church, "I have no theory, no explanation. That man must have been dead for months." I think I'm dying. I wish the priest would end of The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. That is very sudden. Congratulations to everybody who made it this far. I'm very proud of you. We have plenty of time left to talk, which is exciting. I intend to make use of it. Did it literally end mid-sentence? Yes, it fucking did. And personally, I don't like that decision. I think it's kind of cringe even, but I respect the fact that he went for that. I respect that he had the balls to end the book mid-sentence. I mean, you gotta respect that. Oh my god. That is kind of funny. Cause he ends the book with, "I wish the priest would." Oh, maybe I've read too many creepy pastas, but like, it's just so annoying to me when it ends mid-sentence. It just feels very forced and cliche. But I don't know. I really respect that he just went for that. He just fucking did it, like he didn't care. Okay, so let's take a quick break. When we get back, I'm gonna start with some announcements about the stream and some of our upcoming stuff, and then we will get into we will dig our heels in and talk about what we just read. So we're gonna take that break now. See you in a bit. Okay, are we back? How's everybody doing? I'm back, myself. First of all, obviously I said congratulations to everybody who made it through the whole book, and I mean that, but and a very special congratulations to those of you who have now survived 2 whole books with me. I mean, that's incredible. That's a level of dedication that I could not reasonably expect from you. It's very above and beyond. I appreciate it. You deserve a sticker. Yeah, actually, I have some stickers. My dad loves to give me stickers that I don't have any use for. Let's see what we've got. You can't have that one because that's my Ulysses sticker. I would love to give that one to you to piss you off. I have like one of a steampunk Chad. This one appears to be. Oh, this one's Rick and Morty. He doesn't really know what I like. I try to tell him. I have one that's like a Back to the Future in a steampunk style. You can have them all. I fucking love stickers. These hours are all billable anyway. These are billable hours. That is true. I have to accept that fact. Hello, Mr. Rat. Did you just get here? Because we just finished the book. You... we just finished The King in Yellow, so if you're just getting here, then it's unfortunate. No, I've been here. Oh, have you been here the whole time? In stealth. Have you been here long enough that you can stay for our spoiler-filled discussion of the book? Oh, excellent. Wonderful. Again, thank you to all you guys. It's been super fun doing this, and I don't know, it just makes me really happy to do something that is like not only feels productive, but also involves me getting to share my interests with people and talk about them. And you know, you guys have been receptive, and I really appreciate that. Like I said, it has gone beyond what I expected or even really felt like I deserved. So I'm really thankful for that. Next up, now that I've got many of you here, I would like to do a couple of quick announcements. Announcement number 1. Next week, we will not be reading or starting a new book. Next week will be the Crad Birthday Stream Extravaganza. So I'm just here for the Doristo chip. I respect that. It will be the Crad Birthday Stream Party Extravaganza. I'm not going to totally spoil what the activity for Crad Day is just yet. We don't even really have the details fully ironed out between you and me. So I'm not going to totally spoil what we're going to do, but I would say I hope to see you here, and if possible, I plan for some audience participation. I would hope I want you to be ready to show up and take part in a game or some games that will involve some real contribution, and may even involve you being in voice with us at some point. It's not going to be a strict requirement, but that was how we originally envisioned it, or how I envisioned it, I guess. So there'll be some surprises, but I would say plan for it to be, if you would like to come, I would plan for it to be a pretty significant commitment of your time, more so than just hanging out and listening to the stream. We're gonna play some party games. We've got one based around we got one that's got a book club theme, sort of. So I'm gonna give plenty of more announcements about that. My next announcement, the following week. So this will be. I just discussed Thursday the 17th. Following week is Thursday the 24th. On that day, we will be doing kind of a special bonus King in Yellow. We will be reading More Light by James Blish, which is a sort of like a fan story that James Blish was an editor for H.P. Lovecraft, and both Lovecraft and Blish were big fans of this book, and More Light by James Blish is sort of a fan story um, where he gets his hands on the actual play, The King in Yellow, and he reads it, and we get to read it, and he describes the whole play. So, you know, you get to have your curiosity sated a little bit as we're going to actually go through the actual play, or his interpretation of it anyway, obviously. There's no canon play. So I thought that would be fun. That's I think the most important of the like King in Yellow expanded fan work universe stories. Like that's the one that's really worth reading because you get to see somebody attempting to write and recreate the whole play based on the references to it in this book. So I think that's going to be fun. That's only going to take us one night. It's a short story. And really, if we don't finish it, we just don't finish it. Like, not a big deal. So that's kind of a bonus day. I'll be recording that and uploading it as like a King in Yellow part 4. But it's going to be pretty laid back. I'm not going to be cracking the whip, being upset if people aren't here. It's just going to be a fun thing. If you like plays, you know. And then I have one more announcement, which is that after that, so now we're talking about Thursday the 3rd and onward, we will be starting our next book. And I'm going to announce what that book is now. Let me pull it off the shelf. This will be our first partner book where I will be reading with someone. We will be reading the novel Pen Pal by, is his name really this? His name is Dathan Auerbach. What kind of fucking name is Dathan? Maybe I'll call him Dan. Dan Auerbach. In an attempt to make sense of his own mysterious and unsettling childhood memories, a man begins to reconstruct his past. As the games and adventures of his youth become engulfed by a larger story, he finds that it forms a tapestry of unbelievable horror that he never could have expected. Each chapter completes a different piece of the puzzle for both you and the narrator, and by the end of it all, you will wish that you could forget what he never knew. So this is a horror story. Colonizer giving white name. True. This is a horror story. I believe it was actually originally a No Sleep story that was remade and compiled into a novel. It probably will only take us about a month, and it will be a partner read with none other than my first reading partner. I'll give you 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. It's Crad! And we'll be doing that together. We'll be reading it collectively, which hopefully will take a lot of the weight off my poor voice. Crad month. And then after that, we'll be starting another book, which will be me and a different partner, which I'm not yet prepared to announce. But some of you know what it is. But don't, you know, let's not go around throwing out things that are not set in stone yet. 3 Crad subject streams in a row, baby. Oh, God. Well, Pen Pal will probably take several streams. It will probably take about as long as The King in Yellow, maybe a little longer. It will be another full-length, serious book project, like The King was. Are you reading the Bible with Jesus Christ? It's kind of similar to that, yeah. But yeah, the Pen Pal will be our next full-length book project. So that will be, my plan is to start that on the Thursday, the 3rd of March at this point. But at that point, Elden Ring will be out, so who knows if you will even hear from me for the next month. So I think those are all my announcements. That's the current schedule. Next week is the Crad birthday stream. Following week is More Light by James Blish, and then we're going to start a new book. That's almost my birthday. It's my husband. That is true. That is almost your birthday. Maybe we'll do something. Maybe we'll do something too. Maybe we'll we could put the book off. We could put the next book off for another week. That's absolutely possible if there is some ideas you have for something to do. But yeah, we'll see. Put that back on the shelf. So to reiterate, birthday next week. high audience participation. I hope to see you there because you will be getting to party with us. And then we'll read a bonus King in Yellow expanded universe story. And then we'll start our next book. Oh, my books are all toppling over. I need to fix my bookend. Come on, little buddy. What the fuck book is this? Oh. Right. Okay. Party. Don't read it. Don't read what? Oi, streamer. What? What's up, Nick? Are you ready to talk about the book? I mean, can I mail you an item? My mystery shelf book? It was the Communist Manifesto. Can I mail you an item? Yeah. Okay, anyways, let's talk about the yellow sign, and let's talk about the King in Yellow as a whole book. Can you message me your mail location? Do you want me to actually do this, or are you doing something? Like, are you having fun, or do you want me to message you my address? Like, I would like for a clarification at this point. It wasn't what I expected. You're serious? Okay, alright, let me DM you real quick. I hope it's a custom clown clip. You can say it on stream, I suppose. Shut up! Put your phone number in chat. While you're at it, I forgot it again. I can't think of a funny meme phone number. The only reason I'm not like, what's your SSID? Just wondering. Your mom's maiden name? Well, that's Castle. That's my name. I have enough of a problem with scammers, army recruiters, all kinds of people fucking calling me. Give me those sexy digits on the back of your credit card. You can have my fucking credit card. It's fucking empty. And it's gonna be empty for a long time. Nobody call that. There you go, Nick. Okay. Do you remember when you... yes, I remember when on your stream, I gave you my phone number. You called me. I answered sounding sleepy and pretended that it was a random number and that it was not me on the other end, but it was just a guy that I had tricked you into calling. And then I hit you with the custom clown clips. That was badass. I was like, who is this? Hello? I literally could not process the voice. Not like you had heard my voice that much up to that point. That was a while ago. That was when I was living in West Melton. Okay, alright. The King in Yellow is a scary story by Robert W. Chambers. It is a series of loosely connected short stories that are all built around a fictional play in the form of a book called The King in Yellow, and what happens to you when you read it. Usually bad things, but sometimes good things, weirdly enough. And lots of references are made to the play, but the King in Yellow himself occasionally shows up. And that's when things get interesting. And he says to you, Ooga booga. Or whatever he says in Court of the Dragon. I don't remember. I've got a Bible quote. And people have a lot of thoughts on what this book means. The King in Yellow was later, although vaguely, the King in Yellow was later adopted by H.P. Lovecraft, who made some references to it in his own works to imply that it was like that the king is like an emanation of one of his gods, who's also named Hastur after the city in The King in Yellow. And so a lot of people think of it as eldritch horror, but I don't believe that it is that. You know, it was sort of H.P. Lovecraft adopting it gives you the idea that it is supposed to be eldritch horror, but I definitely don't think it's eldritch or even cosmic horror. Personally, I don't think there's anything cosmic about it. Besides, I guess, the fact that Carcosa is, or I guess Aldebaran, is described as kind of an alien-looking place a few times, and you know, it is sort of implied to be another planet in the book, but I don't think that cosmic is the way I would describe the horror, or the way I would interpret the truth about The King in Yellow. Some interesting things that we may have missed in our first read through of The Yellow Sign. I guess the main one is Mr. Scott referencing that not only did he know Mr. Castaigne, Hildred Castaigne, but he had recently heard of what happened to him. You know, his being committed and dying in a mental institution, presumably, you know, after his breakdown at the end of the Repairer of Reputations. That's interesting. The two know each other, and hearing about that was what fully convinced Mr. Scott to never touch the book. I thought that was something, especially the reason I thought that was quite something was because Mr. Castaigne is not really written to be that old, and Mr. Scott is written to be an older man. You know, maybe he's a student of him or something, but you know, they knew each other. And that was a little reference, and I think what was important about it was to tie together the worlds, you know, and say that because the Repairer of Reputations does a lot of describing like its fake sort of it's like horror fake world from Castaigne's mind. It's interesting to see somebody reference him in real life, especially in a story like The Yellow Sign, which makes no reference to government lethal chambers or any of that shit that he was talking about, which we probably can now all agree was completely off the wall. He had a reputation repaired. Maybe. He probably would only know Mr. Wilde if that was the case. But it's possible. He definitely is an unscrupulous guy, so it's not out of the question, certainly. But generally, Hildred was known for not putting a lot of stock in the whole Repairer of Reputations thing, and even kind of telling Mr. Wilde that it was not a profitable business and he didn't want to be a part of it, so maybe not. But what happened in that story definitely connects to all the stuff that we've heard about the Yellow Sign up to this point, right? It's a pretty literal take on it. He finds the Yellow Sign in this like fate way that seems very inevitable and like just by process of pure fate. And then, you know, he's not as informed as some of the other characters are, like the one in Court of the Dragon or the ones in the Repairer of Reputations, who know instinctively that being sent the Yellow Sign is a bad thing that happens to you, and you really don't want it to happen. But Mr. Scott does not know. He's never read it. He's stayed away from it. When he receives the Yellow Sign, not only does he not immediately recognize it as the Yellow Sign, but you know, he doesn't have any negative association with being given it. And one of the biggest connecting plot points through all four of these stories, although I guess mainly three of them, not really the mask, but one of the biggest connecting threads that we've been discussing this whole time is this idea of characters in the book are being sent the yellow sign, and then something bad is happening to them as a result. And we're talking, and I've been talking with you about what does that mean? Does that mean that the yellow sign like compels you to do a duty, or does it is it a mark of for death? Is it a mark of ownership by the king that he owns you now? And I definitely don't think that we've come out with an answer based on the events of the yellow sign. Not one that is consistent with our interpretations up to this point, anyway. But he gets sent the yellow sign, and then after reading the book, the Watchman like chases him down and closes in on him. He comes into his studio, and we don't really know what happens. We just say that he says that the king in yellow has shed his tattered mantle, and now there's only God to cry to. And then we flash forward to when he's in the asylum, and he says that Tessie is dead. The Watchman is dead, and the doctors think that he had been dead for months by the time he was discovered. And Mr. Scott is dying. Although if he has a disease or something, it's not specified. He may just be dying of, some kind of fear or anxiety or some supernatural curse of the king. Check my message real quick. Oh no. I've been sent a package by a man with a sense of humor. That's never a good thing. So that was the main thing that happened there. That's why it was called the yellow sign. I like that he concludes with the yellow sign because it's such an interesting detail that over the course of the other three stories, you start to become more and more interested in, like, oh, what's this yellow sign? He keeps talking about why does it seem to have some plot consistency in what it stands for, what it does, but not enough for us to form the whole picture. And then he ends with the yellow sign. He's reading your mind. That's what it felt like to me. This one's not a joke package. Oh, okay. I don't know what to think. I guess I'm excited. But I think it leaves us with more questions than answers. It's not like it exactly told us what happens to people who are sent the yellow sign. We know it spelled disaster for Mr. Scott. I'm almost interested in the idea that maybe the fact that it was a disaster, like the fact that it spelled almost an instant disaster, a death, like death. It spelled death for Mr. Scott. It was a summon for an audience with the king for the narrator of the Court of the Dragon. And in Castaigne's story, it was a call to action. It meant three different things across the three different stories. Which is interesting to me. I almost feel that you could make the argument that what happened to the person who saw the yellow sign in each story was based on their own interpretation of what it was, right? You could say that Mr. Scott was already having fears of his old age and nightmares about his death, and then he gets the yellow sign and he thinks this means I'm going to die, and so he dies. Whereas, with Mr. Castaigne and Mr. Wilde, they think that they're rulers. They think they send people the yellow sign to compel them, and, Vance sees the yellow sign presented by them, and he thinks he has no other options but to serve them, and so he does. And then Mr. Wilde, or not Mr. Wilde, the narrator of The Court of the Dragon is a little more interesting because we don't know a whole lot of background about him. Self-fulfilling prophecy, power of mind over matter, lol. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at, but I think that's just one interpretation. I don't necessarily think that it's the most intended one in terms of the yellow sign specifically. But mind over matter is definitely what we're going to get into. Because the two interpretations of the yellow sign are based around either Tessie and Mr. Scott's dreams being supernatural premonitions of the coming of the King in Yellow, or if they were just having those dreams and like the King in Yellow, seized on that. How did the girl die again this one, or did she? She did die. She dies during the thing that he doesn't say. He says that he's been pursued by the Watchman, and then when the Watchman comes into the room, he doesn't describe what happens. He just says, in that moment I knew the King in Yellow had shed his tattered mantle, and there was only God to cry to now. And then it flashes forward, and he says that Tessie and the Watchman are both dead now. So he's he doesn't say exactly what went down in that room on that night. He doesn't seem to want to, or maybe he's not capable. But she is dead. And he is presumably charged with her murder, resulting in him being locked up in the asylum like he is at the end of the story. That's interesting. Honestly, there's not a whole lot of, what a cop-out. There's not a whole lot of on-screen deaths in The King in Yellow. There is, Mr. Wilde is killed in a fight with his cat, which honestly, girl boss cat. Vance runs into the government lethal chamber. I guess you could count that. Boris also takes his own life. Genevieve doesn't count. She comes back to life. Nobody dies in the Court of the Dragon. It ends with the narrator being confronted with the king, but there's no mention that this has killed him or that he's going to die now. And then the only deaths in the Yellow Sign are the ones that are during the event, which is not described. Not very, not super death heavy. Oh, and also he mentions, Mr. Scott also mentions an organist, which he dislikes at the church across the street, which could be a reference to the organist in The Court of the Dragon. And I think The Court of the Dragon has a cross-reference back where that guy says something about an unsettling church watchman. But that's just from my memory. I couldn't point to it. So people think the King in Yellow is a demon. They think he's like an alien. They think he's some kind of ghost. But now that you guys have read the book, you can come to your own conclusion. I'm going to be honest. I think he's real. Not even in the sense of he's real in the universe of the book. I think that the concept described is real. Why is my phone buzzing? Okay, Simple Flips is live. Sorry, man, I'm busy. The King in Yellow is a book that people read, and it's got some kind of disturbing but captivating, very artistically beautiful content in it. And the people who read it seem to be prone to hallucinate, to have delusions, to become addicted to its content. And in their collective imaginations, in their collective actions based on what they do as a result of reading the book, in the collective interpretations and goals and dreams of all the people who seem to read this book and are pushed to do things from it, therein the King in Yellow is given a sort of consciousness, right? And I think that's the answer to the riddle. Even if the King in Yellow is literally just a harmless book, these people who are reading it and are being driven to kill other people and have delusions and hallucinations about a grand alien god they worship and a cult that they're going to run to take over America and, killing, maybe even having delusions of not being responsible for killing the people they kill. Therein, the King in Yellow, which was a purely fictional character even in the book, becomes real, right? Like, people are killing and dying for the King in Yellow. Even if he's just a hallucination, he becomes a real scourge on their version of the Earth. The real King in Yellow is the friends we made along the way. Well, I mean, that's the question, right? What is the real King in Yellow? And that's what I think the answer is. The real King in Yellow is this idea, and when the characters in the book act on that idea, a sort of will or consciousness is given to the king. He is fiction, but as we can clearly see, especially in the Repair of Reputations, he is fiction who imposes his will on reality. Even if it's just a book with no supernatural powers, you still have Mr. Castaigne and Mr. Wilde plotting assassinations, creating a web of blackmail, plotting for the fall of America and having it be replaced with an imperial dynasty, all in the name of the King in Yellow. At that point, the King in Yellow has become real. He's become a real thing that these characters who read the book have planned their lives around, have orchestrated all these events around, and like I said, are killing and dying for. Just because he's not an alien sitting on a distant star somewhere does not mean that the King in Yellow, as portrayed in this book, is not exerting his will on the real world, on reality. It comes from writing. Doesn't writing come from man? It does. It absolutely does. That's exactly right. He comes from writing, and when you read that writing, if it compels you to do something, you've now been affected by this character, even though he's not real. And that is what all fiction is. Right? People are, oh god, the whole does a fiction affect reality argument from Tumblr. Well, first of all, Okay, I don't know what that is, and I really don't want to know about this Tumblr discourse. I really don't. But the question of does fiction affect reality is so obvious that a toddler could answer it. Like, yes, obviously it does. like, but if you're about to get into pro shipper and anti shipper stuff, I would encourage you to um, not, because I don't care. I don't care at all. But the question of does fiction affect reality is obviously yes. Entire empires have risen and fallen in real life from fiction. Wars have been fought over fiction. Dynasties have been arranged according to important books of fiction. Revolutions have been executed through books of fiction and through books of writing in general. And that is what The King in Yellow is meant to convey. That is what the theme of the book is. And in my opinion, that's why the Catholic imagery is so potent. He wants you to draw a connection between the Bible, this book that has literally given rise to and fall to empires through human history. He wants you to draw a line between the fact that the Bible has decided human lives, whether it's real or not, it has decided real human lives, and the King in Yellow, which in this universe, whether it's real or not, has decided the fate of real human lives and almost gave rise to an empire. Right. This is what that's clever. I think it is. I think it is. I think that's what it's about. I think the King in Yellow in this universe is just a book. It's literally just a book. There's no alien, there's no ghost. It's just a book. But it doesn't matter that it's just a book. The things that a single book can do, you know, and he wants you to think of the Bible when he says this, the things a single book can do are change the course of human history forever, for example. And that's power that the King in Yellow has, even though he's not real. He is a fictional character with a completely non-fictional malice, in a sense. That's what I find fascinating about him. That's what I think is so interesting about the character. The real King in Yellow is the Lord. Some people do genuinely believe that. And honestly, I don't think it's that egregious of an interpretation, but I don't agree with it. I think it's maybe a little reductive. I don't think the point of The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers is the Bible is cringe. I think the point of The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers is, like, look how powerful fiction is. If you were good enough at it, if you were compelling enough at it, you could create a demon that haunts the entire planet without ever even needing to be real in order to enact his will and control the earth. The type of threat that doesn't need to come from another planet. It can come from the mind of a person. And you can just put it in a book and create a demon that terrorizes the earth. So it's quite fun. I'm a big fan of the character. I have, as I've talked about before, I am in possession of 3 expanded universe King in Yellow books. Their names are A Terrible Thing, Under Twin Suns, and The Hastur Cycle. It's a lot of fan works. It's lots of fan stories, fan essays on the meaning of the book, some poetry and artwork, and all this different stuff. Because I think I think it's such a fascinating character to build a community around. This idea that the King in Yellow is like a almost a virulent piece of fiction, a virulent piece of information, a real life info hazard that effectively, because of the way he operates in this book, has the potential to be as real in our world as he is in theirs, bar nothing. Kind of like an SCP. Oh, God. I mean, he is kind of like an SCP, but it's more like SCPs are kind of like him. You know what I mean? I gotta go take a shit, BRB. Alright, well, I said it out loud for you. But I don't know. I think it's fascinating. I think it's clever, and it really kind of stuns me to think about this idea that, like, the King in Yellow, as he is described in this book, there's no real reason to say that he's not real in our world, right? Because all he is a fictional character that somebody wrote in a book someday that drove people to act in such a way as to create almost a collective will. All he is just a fictional character that essentially became real through the way that people interpreted him and imagined him and thought of him, and there's no reason to say that that hasn't happened in real life. It certainly has not been as dangerous, thank God. But I guess that's the thing that fascinates me about him, is that every time you think about this character, it contributes to something collective from the whole of human history ever since he got dreamed up. And everybody has a different interpretation of what he is. You know, everybody has their own idea of what he looks like and what his goals are, and those things come together. They don't conflict, really. They just expand on him. There's this guy, he's got a little book there. But yeah, he's heavily associated with H.P. Lovecraft. He has been ever since. You can find him in, like, what's that game called? Arkham Horror. He's so awful looking. I love him. Yeah, it's quite the image. You can find him referenced in, like, Identity V. Just a lot of people who don't really get it, or at least they don't agree with my interpretation. Which is the same thing as not getting it because I'm huge brain 18 head. But he's kind of, I don't know, it's interesting. It's kind of like a thought experiment, right? That's what he kind of is. For those of you who have read my bit of yellow fiction, I wrote a short little King in Yellow universe story called No More Writing. Might be worth looking over that now that you know the full story and seeing if it makes more or less sense in the context of the full explanation of the King in Yellow. Did the king fucking move? Surely not. Why would he do that? He's not real. He can't hurt you. He's not real. You know, he's not real. How would he be able to hurt you? He's not real. He's not real in that book either, but people got hurt. Isn't that funny how that works? So yeah, I'm excited to read James Blish's interpretation of the full text of the play for you guys. Obviously, it's not gonna drive you insane. In fact, it is. He actually writes quite a bit about how um, the the full text of the play can never live up to what this book has like described it as. Like it's necessarily not going to be as good in real life as it is in your head, and that's something you have to accept if you're going to read it. Like he makes that clear. I think he does a pretty good job talking about that, especially with reference to H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon. Um, but you know, it's a fun read, and I'm gonna have lots and lots and lots of trouble pronouncing all the names and shit in it. That's gonna be exciting. Maybe we'll put it on. Maybe we'll put it on at a local theater. I could be Casilda. Crad could be Camilla. Kitty, you can be the King of Yellow. Mr. Rat, you can be the Phantom of Truth. I think it's a good little story. I think it's got a decent bit of old-timey scares to it. I'm going to enjoy reading it. But if anybody has any questions they want to ask about my interpretation or any ideas they would like to contribute, I would say now would be a great time. Probably will be. I think we're definitely approaching time to start wrapping up, so I'm not gonna repeat myself any further. That is. I cannot forget Carcosa, where black stars hang in the heavens, where the shadows of men's thoughts lengthen in the afternoon. I pray God will curse the writer, as the writer has cursed the world with his beautiful, stupendous creation, terrible in its simplicity, irresistible in its truth, a world which now trembles before the King in Yellow. That's from the Repairer of Reputations. It's on the back of the book. My copy, anyways. Now I gotta put the dust jacket back on. Ugh, I hate dust jackets, but this one's too nice. Okay, well, nobody has anything they want to talk about. I think we're just about ready to put a bow on the King in Yellow. Wrap it up. You know, accepting the little bonus episode we'll have in 2 weeks, but other than that, I think we're just about done. So, again, thank you to everybody who made it all the way through. That's impressive. I know that although it was shorter, it was much more of a task than The Shining. You know, The Shining sort of grips you by itself, but The King in Yellow does not grip you right away. It requires a little bit of work from your part to stay invested. And so I appreciate those who put in that effort. Doritos Chisp. Awesome. Chisp. Our next book, Pen Pal, is much more modern, a lot more straightforward. I think it'll have an easier time holding people's attention. I won't have to be like, wait, give it a chance, the way I have to with The King in Yellow. Pen Crad Pal. Relax. Okay, you don't get every stream I've ever made named after you, okay? That's not how this works. But you and I are going to have to talk about figuring out how to divvy up the reading rolls in Pen Pal, because the chapters they vary wildly in length to the point that some are just a few pages and some would take probably a whole stream. So trading off on every chapter is probably not a good strategy. We'll have to find another system. But we got time. I think I'm gonna make a meatball sub and watch some videos. Popcorn reading, LOL. Is that like a school thing? It's a middle school thing. What is it? How does it work? You read, and then out of nowhere go, popcorn name, and they pick up where you left off. Why do you have to say popcorn? Can't you just say, okay, now you go? Because you're popping to the next person, IDK safety word? Come on. Alright. Good night for reals. I have reading to finish. Yep, good night. I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna go ahead and shut it off. So, thank you, and good night.